seed fuckers over here.
Dot trap, dot trap, dot
Hi guys, the Chronic White here, bringing you Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn Remastered, and today we have a very special stream for you. This stream is going to be all about mapping. As all of you know, there have been issues with the maps on the ladder. They're not the worst maps ever, but they're certainly not the best. They are, of course, the OG maps from back in the day, before any sort of competitive gaming for ladder had ever been seen in RTS across the world, before esports existed, before Starcraft had even been uttered from the words of anyone's mouths. CNC existed, and these beautiful little maps, they are of course given to the community just so that people could play each other. You know, the game was released with 2 discs, so you could give one to your friend and play your friend across LAN. But of course those days are well gone, they're well behind us, and it's time for us as a community to move on so that we can accomplish something much higher. And so I want to do this stream for you guys, release this talk so that we can move together as a community. Now, this stream is going to include not only looking at the issues on the current maps, but we're going to be talking about mapping much more broadly than that. We're going to be going through one of my old threads that I wrote some years back now. It took me a good week to write up. And we're going to be looking at some of the maps that I will propose and why exactly we're going to be proposing those maps. But of course, those maps don't have to be the ones for the ladder, because I'm going to give an outline on what I think that we should have for the standard for the map, but also how we're going to create a variety of maps on the ladder. So even if the dev team wants to look at it from that perspective, they will have an outline to be able to make their own maps along that standard, along those lines, to be able to still give us a fantastic variety, to be able to actually create a really great competitive scene for Command & Conquer Tiberian Dawn. I have high hopes for this game. The remaster has been fantastic so far, and we want to do everything we can going forward to make this as best as we possibly can. Woohoo! Let's do this thing. So, to start off the talk, we're going to be moving to one of my old threads regarding map design, and then looking at the issues and things that I'm bringing up there. We're going to be looking at some of the OG maps, and we're going to be looking at why those don't really fit into this sort of standard, and then we're going to be looking at some of the maps that we do think will be a really good idea. So let's crack into that now. Perfect. Here we are. Hurrah! So let's just go through it. Alright, so this is a thread. I want to write it for a while, and with what feels like a big surge of new maps coming out, which is what was happening at the time, there was no better time to write it up. Hopefully it will spark some interest in getting thinking caps on for some amazing maps to be turned out. And I really do suggest that if people are interested in mapping, one of the best things you can do is just get in there and get started. So, let's go. So with all that clear, we want to talk about map design and how different maps can favour the different teams and the different factions in the game. With all that clear, we want to talk about map design and how different maps someone getting some different teams and the different factions feedback or something. I got the stream running double, do I? There we go. Sorry about that. I probably don't even need to have that open now. That was literally just to update the writing for the stream. Oh god, head right back to this. So the thread that we're about to talk about isn't about balancing everything precisely. It's actually specifically about design. So it's not about the do's and don'ts, it's about design. So we're not going to be looking about just saying, make it completely balanced. It's almost impossible to make a completely balanced map. And in fact, making slight imbalances in your map, I actually suggest is a good idea, as it actually makes it far more interesting. So with this thread, I'm going to be using my own maps as reference, mainly because I understand them more. And of course, you can make whatever maps that you like. Alright, so within the thread, we're not going to go over this bit so much because this is more about how to actually make the maps and place the tiles. The two areas that we really want to be looking at during this stream is paths and areas. So it's how to actually create paths, how to create how to create choke points, and how distancing the maps and doing such things can change how the map plays, how the map flows. And we want to look at the resources as well. The resources is a really important part of the map, not only because obviously you need Tiberium to build things, but because how we place the Tiberium can affect how the harvester pathing can work. It can create maps that are more turtley or more expansive, more defensive or aggressive play, and how it can even influence unit compositions. Okay, we're going to zip through this part. So this part here was more about how cliff faces and corners and so on fit together, and how to go about designing that if you want to do that. So if the thread is there if you want to get into it, and I will, when I release this onto my own YouTube as well, because I will be uploading this there on that channel, I'll place a link to this thread there for anyone who wants to look into it more. So the step is all about understanding how units move against one another, how to create a map with engaging micro. To understand this, we're going to look at some of my own maps, what their initial design was, and how it actually ended up playing out. They can often end up playing out differently to how they were intended, for better or for worse. It's absolutely true, and that's why I say if you want to get into mapping, one of the best things you can do is literally make maps and play on them and see what happens. So firstly, we're going to deal with the philosophy of starting in a closed area and slowly opening up. And we're going to look at one of my first maps that I felt was actually successful, and that is Iron Valley. The original idea for Iron Valley was to have 2 consecutive circles around each of the bases, which is sort of what is happening here. And a third Tiberium patch would stretch away from the safety of that circle, and so that's this patch here. So if you're coming out here, you would then zippity zap across this area here. If I think 2, 3, 4, 5 should be there. You can see it a bit more clearly here. So what I'm talking about here is this is like a circle here which entrenches a base. Then there's an outer circle again which entrenches the base like this, and then out here this ends up being a bit more open. Okay. That's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. So once outside the second circle, the third Tiberium patch is stretched away from the safety, and off in the distance, a fourth patch which you would be able to reach. Ultimately creating 2 battles over resources. Okay. The area later became the 4th position for the opponent. Yeah, so this is what I found. So this is what this one is talking about, where the initial idea was that you would come across here and you would expand like this. But what I found is that it was actually better for people to expand like this. And so this is what I mean by how the philosophy of your original design of a map can change. And it's important to understand that that is a thing. But sometimes you'll make a map in one way and it can end up playing out differently. And it can be fine that it can play out differently to how you intended it to, as long as you still have fluidity of how the map works, and you still create compelling matches on the map. I'm just going to zip past that now. We don't really need to look too much more of that. The only other thing I really wanted to say is note that there's like no real Tiberium in the middle of the map. And just coming back to it here, you'll see this area is actually like specifically for fighting in. Like these areas are more like the defensive areas of the map, but then here this is like literally a small area of the map that's just for skirmishing around. And there's a little bit of terrain here, so you can use that as like a little bit of a choke point if you wanted to do that as well. Now, I wanted to move on to a different map, Frosted Hostilities, and with Frosted Hostilities, the idea with it was that you'd have more of an offensive option, because Iron Valley is rather a defensive map. And in particular, it was utilizing this here, where you can see that if you came across the map here as an offensive player and you're trying to attack either of these, so this is an example of the type of mechanic I was wanting to put in, there's a shorter attack path, right? So you can zap between those 2 areas and pressure these 2 areas. For the defender, it's actually far more difficult. This is a far longer path. This is an annoying little choke to get your units through. And there's this problem of trying to defend 2 areas. And so I went ahead and built that for Frosted Hostilities. This is Frosted Hostilities? Yes, it is. Great. Fantastic. And so you can see that we've done exactly that type of mechanic right here. So you start off with a nice little area, and there's this little choke point here, and you can kind of secure some Tiberium here. But let's say the opponent comes across the map, they can bounce between these two areas pretty easily. Here, remember that when you expand, you'll even be placing buildings into this area, right? Structures in here. And they'll actually block off the path of your own unit. So it actually becomes annoying to defend. Which is not to say that this is a map in which there is no ability to defend, but it still creates aggressive strategies capable of happening in the map by creating specific things on it to allow that aggression to take place. So that's really important to have these types of features in maps without just opening the whole map up. There's still interesting things happening. We can still see that there's some defensive options here. You still start in a bit of a closed area, in fact actually a very closed area. And the type of expansions that you can have, you can actually choose, right? So here you've actually got two expansion paths. Iron Valley, you only really have the one. Here you've got more options, so you could actually also expand aggressively if you do so want to. And you can see that we've depicted them here in these figures. So this is what I was talking about before, where this is a longer path here. You can see the two consecutive circles again, allowing for the defense. But offensively, you have these little paths here where the aggressor can bounce back and forth between to create these aggressive options. Here we can see the aggressive expansion path, right? Where someone can actually, instead of using the defensive path, they can aggressively come out through here and place things like defenses down to start to capture their opponent's Tiberium. Of course, that opens them up to more attacks coming in from here and here. Wait, this is... Oh, jeez, did I really just do that? Perfect. If you say you expand it across here, you could put defenses and things here and block off your opponent from being able to capture their own Tiberium. So it gives you options in how you expand your base and where you move your units, etc. Gives options of play without just opening the entire map up. And the final one again, once again, we can see the Tiberium's off to the sides and the middle area is opened up. This is where the battle takes place, and this means that not all your grenadiers and minigunners and rocket soldiers aren't going to die in Tiberium during the game, but there's still options for you to be able to hide recon bikes at the back of these areas, jump in and attack harvesters, which is sort of annoying for the infantry to have to try and do to defend harvesters, so that still plays into the game enough. Moving on to something a bit more defensive, we can actually look into how you can completely change a game by locking everything off. Now this is Quarry, and Quarry is a map which is incredibly defensive. So much so that it can actually be hard to find aggression completely. The entire middle of the map is blocked off. There are only these multiple paths around the edges to be able to attack, making the rush distance extremely long. It makes the map feel huge. But there's still some options to be able to expand in different directions if you do so want to. Ultimately though, the game has a tendency that by the end of it the opponents will have expanded around, and so you end up with a battle in the south and in the north, splitting the map up as a whole. I don't want to go through all of that, but that is mainly what I wanted to know. Also, just noting, because there are so many areas that are cut off, you can do things like place artilleries up here, so as recon bikes and nod buggies come through, you can shell down the cliffs. And this is something that we're not really seeing in the maps in the map pool at the moment. The next part I want to move on to here, so I'll just quickly go over Rushdown Rampage as well. This is a map which is quite constricted, but there still allows there to be very quick attack paths because the map itself is small. You'll see here, you can actually see this is what would usually be the full size of the map. It's been constricted right down to make it very, very small to create these small rush distances. So this is another way to put aggression into your map, to create fast rush strategies while still creating what is otherwise a reasonably constricting map. This part is an important part. This third part is one of the most important things that I want people to know about regarding maps in the map pool at the moment. This is the types of maps that I think that we should have in there. You have to be able to expand to different areas of Tiberium in order to actually access the resources. There are many maps where people will place the resources far too far apart, and in other cases where there's so much Tiberium near the start that there's no purpose in actually expanding, and this also creates boring games because they become very turtly. So I suggest that when we make maps that we think about the types of build orders that are in the game and how the structures will actually place down to make sure that they are near the resources as the game plays out. This is an example on Iron Valley, and as you can see here, you can see how the refineries fit into the different areas. It's specifically set up to actually be built on, isn't it? You can see you can put a factory or an airstrip or so on here in order to expand you right out to the third patch. So very, very quickly, even up to going up to 3 or 4 refineries, you can actually access many of the different areas. But as you do move out, your base starts to become more and more out in the open, which increases aggressive strategies as the game plays out. So the game isn't static, but also the game isn't likely to just end early on. You have options for defensive and economic plays. This is particularly important looking at the current map. This is an example on Frosted Hostilities, and I talked about this just a moment ago regarding different expansion paths. You can see you can choose to expand down to here, or you can choose to expand out to here. And no matter how you choose to do it, that's up to you, and that plays into your strategies, both in how you want to move offensively, or even how you want to look at defending your base. There are options to be able to say if maybe you just want to block off that area, and then you more or less only have to defend this single area in order to defend yourself, right? Because they can't really come in through here to attack you, and so you can just fight here defensively. Alternately, you can come down to here and defend this, giving you 2 tiny choke points to defend. And how you want to do that is up to you. So this gives you options, as I was saying earlier, to defend and have aggression as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at some of the maps in the current map pool. Hopefully these open up just fine. Fantastic. So this is Green Acres. This is probably actually one of the better maps in the map pool. You'll notice some different things between this and the maps we've been looking at very, very quickly. The first thing that's really obvious is that it's not even symmetrical. Alright, so this is the more obvious one, where people will come out and say, well, these maps aren't even symmetrical, therefore they're not balanced. Well, there's a lot more to say about balance between maps, and I hope already that you're starting to have a look at the maps that were there and thinking about the type of balance that is in the game, particularly between GDI and Nod. But also we'll note that there are issues with the Tiberium. This is not really built to expand on properly. You can see if you start down in some of these areas, you can't even really expand out. There's Tiberium right in the way. You can kind of micro through your harvesters to be able to expand out, but even once you do that, the next Tiberium is so far away that you can barely access it. And even like this Tiberium here that might seem close is still far, far away because your harvester has to come all the way around here to gather it. In a situation of GDI versus Nod on a map like this, we see that Nod will just always use the same strategy of recon bikes and bike buggies because, recon bikes and buggies because this type of map really doesn't play into many other strategies other than that because it's so open. It can also create issues with harvester pathing. Now, I just want to quickly run over to here. Which one's one I was want to go? Nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide. I think it might be. Oh, there it is. So nowhere to hide, you know, for the untrained eye, this might seem a lot like Green Acres, kind of an open map, and there's some spread out Tiberium fields around the place. But this is obviously just ridiculous. Look how little resources there are in any areas here. And although the map is covered in these little pieces of terrain, they more or less don't even really largely play into the games at all. Any match that you have on a map like this, you're not really thinking about placement with the trees. You're just thinking about how you can quickly zippity zap across the map and kill your opponent before they can kill you. There isn't really a place for economic play on any sort of a map like this. This might seem like this gives you a lot of options by being a very open map, where actually the opposite is true. You actually have very few strategies you can play on this map because there is nothing on this map to build your strategies around. The other map I wanted to look at, one pass fits all. Alright, so this map's become more popular online. But remember when I was talking about harvester pathing? So let's just go back to one of, I think Iron Valley is perhaps a good map to have a look at this on. So Iron Valley, you can see like quite clearly the fields are very, very separate. And so when the harvesters path, even with the new harvester pathing, they'll only ever be collecting tiberium from just around the immediate areas where you would place the refineries. Place a refinery here, it's just going backwards and forwards, just backwards and forwards, just backwards and forwards, etc. Let's come over to one of these maps here. This is the one I wanted. Immediately we'll see the tiberium. You might say, oh, that's one patch there and that's one patch there, but actually they're so close together that the harvesters end up kind of pathing onto the next one, and they end up going on bizarre long trips backwards and forwards between your base. So if you spawn down here and your harvester ends up pathing even just to this piece of tiberium, it might just eat along here and look at these that are larger pieces, larger pieces, larger pieces, and it ends up just going up the map and pathing from bizarre areas. And this creates a real imbalance in the game. Already there are other problems with this map, not just in regarding expansions. Hello there, Kyra. How are you going? Not only just in how you expand, but because of the harvester pathing, it creates these horrible imbalances. There's also, again, not a lot of strategy, but there's at least some chance for economic and turtle play on this map. Again, this is probably one of the better maps. Let's go over to have a look at Monkey in the Middle. I think this might be on the other one. Is Monkey here? Monkey is here. Alright. I suspect Monkey in the Middle is perhaps a slightly more popular map. It looks at least slightly more symmetrical than a lot of the other maps that we have on the map pool. But it has real issues with the resources again. This is not built to expand on. Although there are resources in your initial area and then just outside of your initial area, we have problems straight away. You cannot build directly to this tiberium in order to gather it. And you can't capture the areas of tiberium either. This is very, very open to be attacked by things like bike buggy. You can see what the designer was going for in this map, but it simply doesn't play out the way that the designer was hoping for it to. You can also see that it's unfair for certain areas. So here you can probably actually expand a little bit easier to the tiberium, and some people who are perhaps even more familiar with this map will be able to tell you which of the spawns are actually better to spawn in and which ones are easier to be able to gather the tiberium from. There's also clearly not enough tiberium in a lot of these areas. Again, you can see what the designer was going for, which actually is something closer to the type of map that I am actually describing, and yet because the fields are the wrong size, because they haven't laid out exactly where you would and wouldn't expand, we have the problem that it's simply not going to play out in that way. So with that aside, let's start thinking about what... So now that we've talked about standard, let's actually talk about variety in maps. And in order to talk about variety, we're going to come over to this here. So this is a system made by this man here, going by the gamer name of Skix. Now, Skix came up with this system of categorizing maps for Starcraft 2. And so good was this system that the official Starcraft 2, not just the community, but developers actually picked up on this system and started using it as a way to create variety on the map, on the ladder. So, just going through what this actually is here, the EARC system, or EARC system, a proposal for defining, in this case, Starcraft 2 maps, but we're going to talk about this regarding Command and Conquer. We're going to be using a very, very similar system to categorize maps. EARC stands for Economic Aggression, Roaming, and Constricting, and it helps to define the maps. So, first of all, it is economic versus aggressive, so how much a map favors an economic macro games and or greedy openers, economy, versus how much a map allows for aggression, low economy games and or rush strategies, aggression. How much freedom of movement and alternate paths a map permits, roaming, versus how much a map restricts any movement and or is based on key areas that can be effectively locked down or constricting. When one of these factors doesn't lean towards either side or has elements of both, it is declared as neutral. And here he has examples of these different StarCraft 2 maps that fit into these different areas. So here he just gives also just another point that he found some maps or some areas to find examples of maps difficult to find. I also had somewhat of an issue with this, where sometimes, because certain types of maps feel better to play on, it can be hard to find an example of each type of map. We're going to go through now, and I've actually picked out some maps. They're mostly my own maps, because I'm more familiar with them, and because I've also been rather restricted on time trying to put this talk together, but I wanted to do it now ASAP rather than down the track. We have an election here in New Zealand, so I'm just busy with that a lot of the time. Let's go through it. So for roaming economy, Frosted Hostilities is a pretty good example of it. The map, as soon as you get outside of your initial area, becomes very, very open, and yet within your initial space is very, very constricted. Okay, so you have, I shouldn't say constricted, it's very, very economic central. There's a lot of Tiberium that you can access reasonably easily, but as the game plays out, the aggression ramps up very, very quickly. So while this is not counted as an aggressive map, it is an economic map, there are still options for aggression as the game plays out more and more and more. For neutral economy, Electric Avenue, what we thought was a good pick. The Tiberium fields are placed against the edges, so they're easier to hold on to. There's a lot of resources available, so there's definitely a lot of room for these sort of more economic plays, but the map is obviously incredibly open. As soon as you start to actually play into the game more, into your matches more, the freeness of this map means that you will definitely be seeing a lot more light vehicle movement and high mobility plays around the map. Constricting economy, heavy metal we thought was a good pick. This one you'll see that the fields are less around the edges and more near the middle of the map. This makes it even more aggressive. There is little room for any sort of defensive or really, really high economic plays on this map, as the more you try to ramp economy, the more you become susceptible to attacks. Heavy metal is a very, very aggressive map, and yet by making sure that the Tiberium fields are evenly spaced around the map and are in decent proportions, we can still create a really aggressive and open map, largely like what we have in the case of Green Acres. Yet we can still actually have a standard to how this plays out. So before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and open up this here. Let's actually go ahead and fill out our own grid to put our own CNC maps onto something like this. Roaming aggression. Yes, that's right. Did I not say that? Did I say the wrong thing? I'll put it onto the grid anyway. Give me 1 second. Might just be a bit easier to open with the other one. Give me 1 second, guys. All good. The roaming economy, frosted hostilities, a more neutral roaming map. Sorry, I did go the wrong way on that one, didn't I? A more neutral roaming map. Electric Avenue. Yes, I am going to zoom in. We'll get there. Thanks for your support throughout this as well, Love Handles. You've been a real help. And I hope that all of this is helpful to the CNC community in the long run. That's the main thing I want out of all of this. These might be quite proportionate in size, but it'll give us a good idea anyway. And more roaming aggression, of course, heavy metal there, as it is incredibly aggressive as a map. Perfect. All right. Let's move on. So for a neutral economic map, which would be this area here, I thought Quicksilver was a good pick. Now, right away, for anyone who's only really familiar with the remaster, you'll notice this is a snow map. It has Tiberium on it. We'll hurry up and we'll get this map brought over for the remaster. But yes, in CNCnet we had updated the game to be able to run snow maps as well. So they were pretty cool to play on. And it'd be really cool to actually see the devs do something like this for Tiberian Dawn as well. I wouldn't mind seeing them update these sort of graphics as well and create some different theaters for us to play in. So as you can see here, it's a bit more there's a large amount of play for economy here, and yet once you sort of bust through things like these fences here, there's a lot of plays to be able to actually play a bit of aggression as the game plays out. It's not overly constricting as a map. So that's part of, that's a really good point there about the way the expansions work. So CNC, of course, the only way to expand in Command & Conquer is to base crawl. And that's why it's important to, as I was pointing out earlier, to make sure that the way in which we lay out our maps is to actually sit down and when we make our map, actually place them. Okay, I'll bring it up here real quick before we go through it. Like here, right? Actually make sure that it's placed in a way where we can reach the resources, that it's laid out, that it's specifically built to be able to reach those resources. If we don't do that, then we end up with issues of our current map pool where the Tiberium's too far away, there's not enough of it, etc. And so we need to seriously think about that. I think in this case I used somewhere between something like 35 to 45 Tiberium cells per patch. And you can kind of have a look into how many Tiberium cells you should actually put per field regarding that. And going forward, I think that the community will get a feel to how much Tiberium they want per patch, and perhaps we will have a standard on, you know, how many Tiberium cells should be considered to be a smaller patch, a medium patch, and a larger patch. And if the community could maybe, you know, come up with some numbers that they would like behind that, then that will help to be a standard for other mappers going forward as well. But hopefully these maps will give a bit of an idea when people play them about how the different sizes of the fields play into it and what's worth sort of spending a bit more money to get to, or allowing yourself to be put into a situation where the aggression against you is much harder to hold, but the payoff is much larger if you can hold those larger fields. And that's something for mappers to think about as well. You know, put more Tiberium in an area that is you know, more prone to aggression on your map. So there's a payoff for being able to hold those areas. Moving right along. For our pure neutral map, I thought Iron Valley was a very good choice. There's room for aggression on the map, but certainly for economic play as well. There's more than one attack path into the base, and yet you can also position those units to defend from those also. For a neutral aggression, we thought elevation was a good choice. The map feels both sort of roamy and constricted in different ways. There are some open areas and there are certainly some closed areas as well. The map can be played aggressively or economically. It doesn't really seem to favour either too much. I think that's where I put it. Aggression, if I'm right about that. Let me just double check that real quick. Oh, it's gone. Lost it. Okay. That's fine. So yeah, that's correct there. Lovely. Yeah, that's right, Val. You've nailed it there. Of course, we need to have some constricting maps as well. And for one of the most constricting maps that we can have, one which is an economic-centric map, we felt that Quarry fitted that very, very well. Quarry is a map that has very little room for serious aggression on it in the earlier parts of the game. In fact, it's so constricting that one of the only sorts of aggressions that feels good to use in the earlier parts of the game is flying aggression, because of course you can zippity zap over the top of all of those annoying cliffs that are in your way. Of course it's Quarry. What else could it have possibly have been other than Quarry? This next one's a little bit of a funny pick, and you know, if other people have other ideas about maps that they think would fit into it well, I'm all ears. I don't really like the idea that people would just pick these maps up and just put them flat into the ladder just because I said so. I more like the idea that the community will talk about it. But the next one is Trichotomy. I'll open this up. Less people are sort of aware of Trichotomy as a map, but I feel that it has a little bit less of economic play in it. But yeah, there's so a little less economic play, there's a little bit more attack path in it. I'll open it up here and show you it. So unlike Quarry, which is what we have here, where the center is blocked, you can see here the center is open, and so you can come through and you can attack into the different areas much easier. There's sort of like a 2 attack paths that is directly to each opponent's spawn point. This is of course a 3-player map. I don't think it's yet up on the workshop, but I can upload it just fine. I might want to double check some of the little pieces. I think there might be a couple of glitches on this map as well that just to be worked out. But there's a little bit more aggressive play than at least on Quarry. And so for that reason I'd put it more into the neutral camp. But it's also questionable as to whether Trichotomy is the best sort of 2-player map. or whether it kind of always will advantage because it has symmetrical symmetry, or whether it will always advantage one of the players going around the map. I should talk slightly about the airstrip, and I'll just talk about that in just a second. Finally, this is one of the ones that was a trickier one to fulfill, and I was almost lucky that I'd made this map because I don't think there was really another example of it. For constricting aggression, we thought that Rushdown Rampage was a really good choice, and we thought that it was a good choice because it has this option for early aggression, but yet once you push past the first part of the game, once you've actually expanded into these areas and you can place down defensive structures, it becomes much harder to be able to actually attack through, and so it starts to feel increasingly constricted. So that gives you an example anyway of the different maps that we can have. I'll just blow this up here for you guys, that we could be using on the ladder, and it gives you an example of how we can categorize those maps. So let's say that we up the amount of maps on our ladder to 9 maps, then we could have 1 map in each of the categories. And we could take that a little bit further as well, and we could have a veto system. So let's say you could veto 3 or even 4 maps from the map pool that you wouldn't have to play on, so that if you were a nod player, you're not forced to play on, say, Quarry, or if you are a GDI player, you're not forced to play on heavy metal. I can not see heavy metal. Here we go, down here, because those are probably, this is probably the most GDI centric map. This is probably the most nod centric map, and I can understand that people wouldn't want to play on those maps and hurt their ladder points too much if in fact they were trying to climb the ladder as a particular side. If they're playing as random, then perhaps they'd be more open to playing on all maps. Yeah, so the cargo plane is obviously an issue. It favors whoever is spawning on the right hand side. Now it favors the person on the right for actually 2 reasons. First of all, because the cargo plane simply reaches them quicker, so the drop off happens faster. But more than this, because of how the cargo plane works, a second cargo plane cannot enter the screen until the first cargo plane has dropped off a unit. And often what happens, particularly with nod buggies, is that as the cargo plane is coming through to drop off the nod buggy, another nod buggy can complete before the cargo plane has even dropped it. So the amount of time it actually takes to build a nod buggy is then also increased. It's not just that it takes longer to be dropped off, but the entire build time for the unit is increased. This is a pretty big issue. It could be fixed by simply increasing the speed of the cargo plane, and the other obvious way to really help nod out regarding that issue and balance would be to just, if the airstrip is placed over on the west side of the map, then the cargo plane will enter from the west side, and that would almost completely fix the issue, and then simply speed up the cargo plane a little bit, make it go a bit faster, or double the speed, or even just a bit quicker than what it is. That would pretty much fix the problem, in my opinion. But I think the community is quite aware of that, and they're quite aware of the ideas that would seriously help to fix that as an issue. So again, these are mostly my own maps. Only this and this are not my own. Here, Electric Avenue and Heavy Metal. Again, the ones that are not uploaded to the map workshop, I'll hurry up. Quicksilver is not uploaded, and Trichotomy are not uploaded. So by the time this sort of goes out and you guys want to play on it, we'll get those maps uploaded for you guys so you can try them out. I think that something like this wouldn't be a bad start for the ladder, just to give people an idea about how maps feel in comparison to the current maps that are on the ladder. just to give people an idea on how to actually make their own maps, and then perhaps we could run a mapping competition. If any of these maps, if we do make a ladder out of these maps, but then any of these maps have issues, why not run a mapping competition for a specific category, so people can try to make a map that'll fit a specific category. The constricting neutral category, for example, from Trichotomy here, I wouldn't mind seeing people replace that with something. Yes, people sort of just chatting over there in the... Yes, I wouldn't mind seeing something that replaced with another map there. So I hope this gives like a pretty good idea for people about the types of things that we would perhaps like to see on the ladder, and certainly the things that I think would specifically help the ladder a lot. I really do encourage people to get in there and do some mapping themselves, to actually give it a try, and certainly to try out these maps, even if we don't get to see these on right, waiting on Trichotomy 2.0. Yes, I am actually working on another level of Trichotomy as well, to help with some of the issues that this map does have, to make it a little less constricting than what it is, because it is perhaps overly constricting. So perhaps I should smash through that and try and get that done ASAP as well, and people can then enjoy that also. In the meantime, feel free to play these maps against your friends, try them out, and have a look at the difference between these and the current maps on the ladder. If anyone's running any tournaments, I highly suggest that you try out these sort of maps for your tournament and see how people enjoy playing on those compared to the current maps. I would say they are even more fair as maps than to put maps that people know that are imbalanced into your tournaments. So I really do suggest that people do that. Is there anything else there from you, Love Handles, that we wanted to add to this talk? I was wondering how long this talk would go for, to be honest. But I think I've bashed through most of it pretty damn well in the space of about an hour or so. Yeah, I think we've mainly nailed it. So to the dev team and to Jim, if you're listening there, thank you for actually sitting through this. I suppose when it'll be reaching you in the form of a video, so thank you for watching the video. If you want to get in contact with me, please do so. I'm happy to talk about this. I'm not going to get angry with you if you don't want to use these maps. These are just examples of what we could use, and the type of system that I think should be looked at by the dev team for making sure that we have both a standard to the maps, but that we also still have a range in how maps play, so that we have a good amount of different strategies on the ladder. And I really do suggest also having a veto system, because this does feel unfair to play as not against GDI on, and this does also feel unfair to play as GDI against Nod on that map there. So having a veto system means that people can say, well, I just don't enjoy playing on, on this as Nod against GDI, and same here, I don't enjoy playing as GDI against Nod, I don't enjoy playing as GDI against Nod. So people can still enjoy the ladder while still having a variety of different maps, and if they do want to challenge themselves, then they can go ahead and open those maps up to play on as well. I think this is a really important part of going forward. The idea of having the OG maps for competitive play simply is just not viable in 2020. Not just the competitive Command and Conquer community, but the rise of things like esports has shown us that we really do need to do better when bringing competitive play to people. This game exists on the internet now, and the internet is far beyond anything it was back in 1995. I mean, 1995, I'd have been waiting half an hour just to load this as a friggin' image. Now I'm streaming it to you live. So I think it's time for us to move forward. If nothing else, I hope that this talk has been really helpful to you guys. If anyone has any questions, if you are seeing this, I'm going to post this video up on Reddit as well. Or you can come and comment it straight on YouTube. I'm going to be posting in different areas, so all feedback is welcome. I really want this to be more of a community thing. So I think it's just important for us to do this as a whole. Yeah, some people they're just commenting on. So I think just the OG maps you're talking about, Val. So some maps can be punishing in different ways as well. So Quarry is one where I feel you can get away with a lot of expansion, and if you hold, then you have a far better chance of actually being able to repel and then gain an advantage from it. Actually, that's something I do want to just talk about very, very quickly. Let's just open up Iron Valley to talk about that. So in the current maps, because of the way that the Tiberium is laid out, economic plays, as I say, aren't viable. Now, when we talk about different strategies in real-time strategy, what usually people will immediately think about is what units are the best units to make. When they talk about strategy, they say, what is the best composition? What is the best thing to make? What is the best thing for me to attack my opponent with? But actually, the very base of an RTS is not composition. Composition can play into your strategy for sure. But more importantly than what you're using to attack is just the amount of stuff that you actually have. It's just the amount that you can actually pump out. Your productivity is a far larger part of the game than is your composition. Now, that opens up the three major strategies to the game: an economic play, an aggressive play, or a defensive play. An economic play is where you've spent a lot of money on gathering income and building up productivity so that later down the track you will have more stuff than what your opponent will be able to build. An aggressive play is where you've skimped on that, on bringing in money now, so that you can just spend your money now and have more things on the field immediately. And a defensive play is where you build, and this is where it comes into a little bit more into units, but you're building slower things, but heavier things, and maybe even defensive structures to be able to hold. Yes, and that's exactly what I'm actually going to be talking about in just a second here, Kyra. So a map like this, you'll see it has choke points. Now, what this means is that you may be able to actually hold against a larger army using a smaller army, which is exactly what I'm going to pronounce it as Kyra is saying here. This actually opens up the play for more economic plays. Okay? It opens up the game for more economic plays. It's also important that there's enough Tiberium behind your defense that once you've held, you have an advantage over your opponent. If there is not enough Tiberium in your starting location and you hold the attack, you're in just as a poor economic situation as your opponent. You haven't gained an advantage by defending their attack. Remember, let's give an example here. So, in general, an aggressive play will beat an economic play because an economic play is going to have less units. An economic play beats a defensive play because a defensive play is more focused around actually holding, but they're not getting that income, and they don't have the option to attack. Because they don't have the option to attack, the economic play is going to beat them down the track. And a defensive play beats an aggressive play because the aggressive play has given up too much into building units now that can't do anything. Whereas the defensive play has actually, yes, it's put a little bit more emphasis onto defending, but not so much more that it's actually chomped out the economy completely, right? The economy play, you could almost say it's a greed play. The map is very important that it actually has some of those features around it. Now, if you go to something like heavy metal here, there's less option for that, right? Which is why we would count this as an aggressive map, because there's less option for you to be able to play that economic game. Does that make sense? So that idea, that paper, scissors, rock. Economic beats defensive, defensive beats aggressive, aggressive beats economic, is an important part about how the map really needs to play out. economic play beats aggressive play. Exactly. Exactly. And so, right, so Quarry is the opposite. Now, it's not to say that that's something that the map shouldn't have at all, but that means that that is what the map is built around. So the standard of the map is that you can still expand to the different areas, and it still moves fluently, but there are less options for aggression. There are still some options for aggression, though. It's not like there's no options for aggression, and we can say the same thing about heavy metal. Where is it? There are still options for economic play, but they are far less than on something like a map like Elevation, or Iron Valley, Quicksilver, etc. Sure. So Val is saying here, don't like the idea that it's just swimming in resources. So that's a really good point, right? So here, if you try to, in fact, grab all the resources, you'll actually get punished for it. So Val might enjoy a map like this. And we could also talk about maps that have smaller fields as well. I don't know if there's a place really in the map pool for that, but perhaps there is. And this is a sort of a question that I want to put to the community on that one. And so I think it's fine. I think it's actually absolutely fine that you feel that way, and that's why I want to have this discussion with the community. But I wanted to open it up as as an intelligent discussion on it, rather than just say, I like this map, do it. Why is it that that map plays in the way that it does, and what is it like compared to other maps? That's why we've built this sort of structure here, to give an idea as to what different maps are and how they fit into the structure. And if we have different maps from these different categories in the ladder, then no matter how it is that you like to play, there should be maps that will fit into different play styles. And also, you learn to play against certain play styles as well. So some maps that you might not enjoy playing on because they don't fit your play style become a challenge to play on. And a challenge can be fun as well. That's one thing I have enjoyed about the current map pool. It's some maps are a challenge to play on, and challenges can be fun. Eventually, however, I would like to see more competitive maps. And so this is what I think is important for that. Does that make some sense, guys? To be able to play into that paper, scissors, rock, aggression, economic, and defensive plays. Don't think high tip and lots of chugs should be a thing. The same could be said for a map like this. Sure, there will be plenty of GDI players out there who will say, this shouldn't be on the ladder. Too easy to make bike buggy. And so this is the opposite end of it. And this is why I think that vetoes are important. So that someone like Val says, well, I absolutely hate playing on a map like this. I can't stand it. It's not enjoyable for me. It doesn't fit my play style. And it's just absolutely destroying all my ladder points every time I spawn on this map. I don't think that Val should have to play on a map like that then. So have a veto system so that they can say, I will never play on Quarry. Trichotomy could be another one, where Val would say, I don't much like this map, but he might like this one because there's a little bit more option for aggression. And yet he also might not like, might be a good example, perhaps Quicksilver, because this also starts to fill into something that feels that little bit more constricting. Might not like it, so go ahead and be able to veto that as well. If you have a few vetoes, then it makes the game more enjoyable for everyone. People can play the way that they like and still have that variety of maps. And if they want to challenge themselves at any point, they can simply remove the vetoes and play the game on those maps and have that challenge, so that the game also doesn't become boring. And because we have a way of categorizing maps, we can create new maps that fill each category and regularly switch maps around in the ladder pool to be able to continue to enjoy it. It also means that if the community finds a particular map has a problem, for example, I was saying Trichotomy may well have problems, then we would know exactly the type of map here, constricting neutral, that we would want to replace. And so everyone could have a mapping competition where we are making a constricting neutral map, and by doing that, then fantastically we can replace that map very easily, and in the meantime we can just veto it. and everyone's reasonably happy with that. I think it's a much better option than the current map pool and the current mapping situation regarding ladder. So that would be my suggestion for how we do mapping going forward. Again, these are only examples. I do think these are better than the current map pool, so if we wanted to use something like that, you can go ahead and try that out for people, even if only over the period of a week or a few days or something like that, to give people an idea as to what that would be like. And then people will have an idea on how to actually make maps as well, because it's very hard under the current sort of situation when you are dealing with maps like these. I mean, look at some of the ones that are sort of sitting in here. Some of them aren't too bad, of course. You know, I mean, the way the Tiberium's laid out here just messes with the harvester horribly. This is clearly just, there's just not enough resources on it. This blocks expansion paths, and each spawn is, you know, I think spawning, some of the spawns are just clearly better than others anyway, so the point that I'm getting at. What's another one? Four Corners, which is a map that we had for a little bit. I mean, just look at some of these spawn points here, just ridiculous. They're barely even near any Tiberium out in the open. And once you harvest your Tiberium, even if you spend a lot of money getting to the next area, it's barely even worth expanding to because there's so few resources there. Monkey in the Middle is probably one of the better maps, but still has significant issues. It's very, very difficult to defend the Tiberium in the middle unless you're playing as Nod, in which case it's a very, very buggy centric map and has problems. Again, you can see the idea that the designer is going for, but the Tiberium fields are probably too small, and so the ones closer to you quickly get eaten up, and then you're just broke, and you're just a game of I don't know, fighting over what little resources are left, but you're barely even able to build anything to do it. If one person at any point gets too far behind in units, there's the game snowballs, right? There's no chance to be able to defend and make a comeback, because you'll never be able to defend your harvesters as they go into the middle to get the Tiberium. Okay, someone's saying that they've found a way to be able to move and build on this map. So again, eventually you probably would find a way to be able to build on this map. I just think that it's a lot harder to be able to fluently defend by comparison to, say, Iron Valley, which is specifically built to be able to move to each of the areas, while as you move out, the Tiberium is still more out in the open, and so there's these chances for aggression on the maps. But again, it's Monkey in the Middle is probably one of the better maps to be able to play on, as it's at least symmetrical, and you can see it does have these choke points that you can in fact hold. Heavily, yeah, kills people who make the refineries in the starting position. That also means that your initial greed as a play is very limited, right? Like let's say that you want to build 3 refineries early on, because you know that your opponent's going to do an aggressive play, but you think that you can hold them in the chokes. That play is just not allowed at all because the Tiberium simply isn't there. Where, by comparison, let's move over to Heavy Metal. Now, Heavy Metal, you can absolutely be punished for building too many refineries, because then you are going to have less units down the track. But you're punished for a different reason, right? It's because you will be able to build less units and the chokes are wide open, rather than simply saying you're punished because Tiberium isn't on the map. It's not accessible, or at least it's not accessible in your immediate starting area. Does that make sense? So if I go back to Monkey in the Middle, there's less chance for a true economic play or a greed play, because your ability to expand to get the larger amounts of Tiberium to actually use your greed play are further away. So you have to play in a similar way each time you play on the map. Heavy Metal, you actually could play, keep losing it, you actually could play economically if you wanted to, and run the risk of your opponent making an aggressive play. But what you might find with a map like this is, because it's a known aggressive map, people start to play on it almost in a more defensive way or aggressive way. They only play defensive or aggressive, because they think that they'll be punished for playing economically. You know, they dare not play agreed play because the obvious thing to do is to play aggression on the map, right? But as everyone starts to play aggression, people start to work out a slightly more defensive build, which allows them to get a little bit more money to be able to eventually overthrow, you know, their opponent's position. But as the meta changes then and moves into that type of defensive meta, then it opens up a meta game for people to be able to play economic games on it, even though the map is not specifically designed for it. Monkey in the middle, this can't happen. The meta cannot change because the map is designed in such a way where you simply can't put down that many refineries early on. It doesn't allow you to because the Tiberium isn't accessible. Does that make sense? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the ability to play with different strategies on each map. Quarry is another one. So Quarry is a map in which you might say, well, you can't do any aggressive plays on Quarry because look how cut off it is. But I'll tell you, I have had someone pick me apart with transport helicopters on this map, because I worked out that you can use Chinooks to drop in different areas, and trying to defend from Chinooks is actually very difficult because your units on the ground can't move around as easily. And so all of a sudden a new type of aggression comes into the game, a new strategy because the map is different. That type of strategy I haven't really seen work well on other maps other than Quarry because of the type of map that this is. It opens up new strategies and new ways to play because of its extreme chokes. It is an extreme map, like this is an extreme map. These maps on, by comparison, you know, this we would probably consider to be similarly categorized as this is, right? Aggressive and aggressive roaming. I've lost it again now. Aggressive roaming, right? But it's aggressive roaming because if you try and play economically, you just run out of money. There isn't enough Tiberium here to actually play the game properly. That's the issue with this map. Not necessarily that it's just open, but because the standard isn't there for it. Other than that, it seems not too horribly imbalanced. You can see what the designer was going for. There's going to be some Tiberium in the middle for you to gather, and then there's Tiberium in all four of the corners. This Tiberium is blocked off, this Tiberium is more open. That makes sense. You know, this is the Tiberium that you want to get later on, and yet there's less of it. You know, why would you want to go into the middle to get less Tiberium that is more on offer for you to be, you know, beaten up really horribly? And yeah, the other part of it is the start spots aren't even actually that even. As Val is pointing out, this is a horrible spot to start in. So there are different reasons why you wouldn't want to play on a map like this, even though the design points are there. As I say, you know, I can point out issues with things like monkey in the middle, but there are still some options. You can see what the designer was going for. You can sort of see what the designer was going for here as well. This is, again, this is supposed to be sort of like heavy metal, right? A wide open area with smaller patches of Tiberiums together. You know, heavy metal, same sort of deal. Pretty wide open area, Tiberium together. Yet, here you can actually play an economic match if you want to give that a go and play that as a risk. Whereas going back to here, you can't actually do that. You'll run out of Tiberium. The amount of money that it costs to build refineries simply isn't worth it for what you get back. And trying to expand out to reach another area so that you can reach some Tiberium, so say you start here and you say, oh, I'm going to go down here to get here. Building all of the structures down here to build a refinery nearby to gather that quicker is not worth it, because the amount of money that it takes to do that basically outweighs the amount of money that you'll get back. So there is no economic play here at all. There's no option for that. You can't play it as a risk. You can't think maybe my opponent's going to play a more defensive play assuming I'm aggressive and so I'm going to be able to take advantage of the meta. You can't do it thinking you're, you know, a god and that you're just going to do it with an amazing micro or anything like that. You can't show off any of those sort of skills. You must play in the same way each time. There is one best way to build your structures, and that's it, right? So these maps might seem like they have more options because they're crazier and wackier, but whereas in reality they actually don't. They are the opposite. They force you into playing the game in a certain way. And while Command & Conquer is a game that is a lot about skill and real time, it is also a strategy game, and we want to see people use those different strategies and see the best that this game has to offer. Again, I don't want to say that these are the best maps that are out there, but this is what I would suggest for the time being, so that we can get a bit of an idea as to what we're doing and actually get some sort of a standard to play Command & Conquer with. By all means, Val, I'm going to put these videos up. There's going to be one on Reddit, there's going to be one on the YouTube. So if you have any maps that you think fit into these categories that are better fit any of them, would love to hear from you. And that goes for anyone else out there as well. And maybe you're even designing some maps at the same time. I've just seen some maps been put up in the CNCnet community from, the guy's name is Gift S or Gifts. He's made some new maps there. So maybe even some of those maps will fit into some of these categories. I'd love to talk to the community about it, and hopefully the development team is also listening and looking into all of this. So thank you guys for listening. We're going to end the stream there because I have some stuff that I need to get through today. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And yes, Val, I will be absolutely giving feedback on all of this, and I hope that the community takes part in this, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the community's ladder. It's not my ladder. It's not the development team's ladder. It's your guys' ladder. And so we want to do this as a community, and that's why I'm doing this as a stream. It's why I didn't just throw maps straight to the development team under the table. As I say, I've got some connections with a few people that are in touch with the development team. I could have just tapped those people on the shoulder and said, this is the maps we should be using, and done it under the table. I don't want to do it under the table. I want to do it out in the open with the community and have discussions with people like Val, like everyone else, to make this happen and make it the best game for everyone out there. I hope this talk has been useful for you all, and if nothing else, I hope to see you guys on the battlefield. Thank you all for listening. We're going to end the stream there, and cheers guys, and here's the Command & Conquer and going forward.